How to build back better bills have put the Democrats in a tight spot. The infrastructure bill is estimated to cost 1.2 trillion over 5 years and the reconciliation bill 3.5 trillion over 10 years. Together both bills form the foundation for President Biden's economic agenda and are part of Build Back Better plan. The US Congress is meeting this week to discuss one of the most sprawling pieces of economic legislation since President Roosevelt's New Deal in the 1930s. Apart from a bill to suspend the debt ceiling, lawmakers will consider two spending bills, one primarily focused on infrastructure and the other a social spending bill henceforth known as Reconciliation Bill. The infrastructure bill is estimated to cost $1.2 trillion over 5 years and the reconciliation bill 3.5 trillion over 10 years. Together both bills will form the foundation for President Biden's economic agenda and are part of the Build Back Better plan. The infrastructure bill, which has already been passed by the Senate, is a bipartisan effort backed by 19 Republican senators, whereas the reconciliation bill is considerably more controversial, drawing concern from both Democrats and Republicans alike. Currently, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has threatened to tank the bipartisan infrastructure bill unless House Democrats agree to pass the reconciliation bill alongside it. Progressive Democrats align largely with Pelosi, but several centrist Democrats are reluctant to endorse the ambitious piece of legislation due in part of its extraordinarily large price tag. This has caused a political standoff that could result in neither bill being passed, which, if Republicans refuse to suspend the debt ceiling, is a possibility anyway. Democrats have a razor thin majority in the House and Senate and can therefore ill afford to lose any votes from within their own party, especially considering that no Republican is expected to vote for the reconciliation bill. Democrats have agreed upon a self imposed deadline on September 27 to vote on both pieces of legislation. Procedural. The process for passing both bills is as usual, Kafsiki. To understand why, we first need to look at how the reconciliation bill came into existence. Biden had initially proposed a much larger 2.3 trillion infrastructure bill that would include both hard and human spending. Hard spending refers to direct investment in roads, bridges, clean water, and so on, whereas human spending refers to less tangible investments in matters including family care, education, and climate change. When Republicans made it clear that they would not endorse Biden's initial bill, Democrats went on to draft a pared down version, resulting in the current iteration that is supported by both parties. To account for the provisions not included in the smaller bill, Democrats drafted the 3.5 trillion bill as an independent piece of legislation that would not require Republican votes. Typically, the House operates under a system of basic majority, but the Senate requires a minimum of 60 votes to pass most legislative matters. Democrats have 50 seats in the Senate, but if votes are split evenly, the Vice President, in this case Kamala Harris, gets to cast the tie-breaking vote. To sidestep the 60 vote rule, Democrats are using a process known as budget reconciliation to pass the larger spending bill. Under the budget reconciliation process, any items that change spending or revenue can be passed by simple majority of 50 votes plus the tie-breaking vote by Harris, a Democrat. Items are not related to the budget cannot be included in the reconciliation bill. The person who determined this is Senate parliamentarian Elizabeth McDowell, who recently dealt a blow to Democrats by declaring that their plan to pass a pathway to citizenship for immigrants born in the US did not constitute a budget item. Reconciliation bills also have to budget neutral in the long term. So Democrats have to raise revenues to offset every new policy they want to pay for. Although reconciliation is meant to help Congress pass budget bills, it is often expanded to include a bunch of other policy proposals. Democrats used the process to pass health care changes in 2010 and more recently, Republicans used to pass tax cuts in 2016. Reconciliation first starts with both Chamber of Congress approving a blueprint which they have for the current reconciliation bill. However, that blueprint only allows legislators to move forward with the reconciliation process and doesn't mean that the actual legislation has been approved. The reconciliation bill is yet to be passed by either chamber while the infrastructure bill made it through the Senate by 69 to 30 votes in August. Provisions of the bill. The infrastructure bill contains matters related to hard spending and represents the largest infusion of federal investment into infrastructure projects in more than a decade. Hundreds of billions of dollars would go into repairing and replacing aging public works projects like airports, railway lines, bridges, and roads. Given the increasing transition to working from home that looks likely to continue after the pandemic, the bill's inclusion of 65 billion towards improving high-speed internet is noteworthy as well. The bill also includes many policy changes, most significantly related to climate change, which serves as a tactic acknowledgement from Democrats and Republicans alike that America is not prepared to handle the growing risk of climate disaster. The bill includes 73 billion to upgrade the nation's electricity grid to carry more renewable energy, 7.5 billion to construct electrical vehicle charging stations, 17.5 billion for clean buses and ferries, 5 billion for removing lead pipes. However, while the infrastructure bill is a huge step forward in and of itself, it includes far less funding for clean energy and transit projects that Biden initially wanted. The reconciliation bill, with its human spending component, addresses several of these concerns by targeting issues related to healthcare, child and elderly care, education, and climate change. The bill also expands upon the 1.9 trillion pandemic relief package that Democrats fast-tracked through Congress in March, increases healthcare subsidies, and raises the duration of monthly payments going to families with children. The last provision is estimated to cut child poverty by nearly half. The bill also includes several new initiatives. It proposes expanding Medicare to include dental, hearing, vision, provides funding for elderly care, makes preschool and two-year college free, funds research on effect of climate change on agriculture, and changes the tax code to subsidize the purchase of electric vehicles. In order to pay for these provisions, bills have to remain budget neutral in the long term. Democrats' plans on imposing a tariff on goods imported from countries with weak climate policies and increasing taxes on wealthy people and corporations. Criticisms of the bill. As it stands, there are around 100 progressive House Democrats who will refuse to sign the infrastructure bill unless it is tied to reconciliation bill. Those Democrats led by Speaker Nancy Pelosi have the ability and numbers to tank both bills unless moderate Democrats agree to pass the reconciliation bill. If Democrats align together, they have the ability to pass both bills in the House and the Senate. Moderate Democrats take issue with the reconciliation bill for two primary reasons: its cost and its provisions for pharmaceutical companies. In terms of cost, there has been no comprehensive analysis of the reconciliation bill, but the assumption is that taxes would have to be raised significantly in order to fund it. For the infrastructure bill alone, the US Congressional Budget Office estimated that its passage would add 256 billion to its federal deficit, which is already at its highest over the next decade. Biden has refused to increase taxes on people earning under 4 lakh a year, who makes up the vast majority of the US population, leading several observers to question where the funding will come from. Even if tax rates are increased to meet the cost of the bill, there are three major problems. First, tax hikes are typically rolled back by changing administration. In the last 30 years, there have been three major tax cuts and only one minor tax hike in 2013. Second, even when the tax rate was at as high as 35% in 2013, a report from the Government Accountability Office estimated that US corporations paid an average effective tax rate of 12.6% and 22%. When loopholes exist, tax rates rarely signify the amount of revenue the government can expect to collect. Lastly, when corporate tax rates climb too high, companies hire fewer workers and often relocate overseas. Critics of the Build Back Better scheme argue that even if increased taxation generates enough revenue to pay for the bill, it could do so at the cost of US economic competitiveness. Thank you.